The thunderous crack of gunfire echoed through the foothills as Elizabeth Warren stumbled forward, her bloodied feet leaving crimson prints on the sun-baked earth. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving Montana Territory had no mercy for a woman alone. Her dress was torn, her face bruised, and her spirit nearly broken as the distant lights of a ranch flickered like stars on the horizon. Elizabeth had been running for 3 days. 3 days since the stagecoach attack that had left everyone else dead. 3 days of hiding in creek beds during the day and stumbling through the wilderness at night. 3 days of hunger that had turned from sharp pangs to a hollow emptiness. Her shoes had given out on the first day, the fine eastern leather no match for the rugged western landscape. The lights grew closer, and Elizabeth could make out the silhouette of a modest ranch house with a split-rail fence surrounding it. A gate stood slightly ajar, as if Providence itself had left it open for her. With the last of her strength, she pushed through it, her vision blurring as she took 3 more steps before her legs finally betrayed her. She collapsed in a heap, the cool evening dirt against her cheek feeling almost like a blessing as darkness claimed her. Yorick Grayson had been mending a bridle on his porch when he spotted movement at his gate. Living alone 20 miles outside of Eureka Springs meant visitors were rare, especially after sunset. He set aside his work and stood, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver on his hip. What he saw was no threat. A woman, clearly in distress, had just pushed through his gate and fallen to the ground. Yorick didn't hesitate. He rushed across the yard, his long strides eating up the distance. "Madam, Madam, can you hear me?" He knelt beside her, gently turning her over. Her face was bruised, dirt-streaked, and alarmingly pale. She didn't respond to his voice. Yorick carefully gathered her into his arms, noting how light she felt, like a bird with hollow bones. He carried her into his house and laid her on his bed, quickly assessing her condition. Her dress was torn and dirty, her feet were cut and bloodied, and dried blood matted her auburn hair at the temple. He worked swiftly, bringing a basin of water and clean rags. With careful hands, he cleaned the worst of the dirt from her feet and bandaged them with strips of clean linen. He placed a cool cloth on her forehead and covered her with his heavy wool coat when she began to shiver. Yorick pulled a chair beside the bed and settled in for a long night. He'd seen enough injuries in his 32 years to know she wasn't in immediate danger, but she needed rest and care. Come morning, he'd ride into town for the doctor if she hadn't improved. As he watched her breathing steady in the lantern light, Yorick wondered what circumstances had brought this woman to his doorstep. The Montana Territory wasn't kind to the unprepared, and from her clothing and delicate hands, she clearly wasn't from these parts. Whoever she was, she'd found sanctuary for the night. Dawn broke with a pale golden light that spilled through the cabin windows. Elizabeth stirred, consciousness returning slowly like a tide. The first thing she noticed was the unfamiliar weight across her body, something heavy and warm that smelled of leather, tobacco, and pine. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself staring at her rough-hewn timber ceiling. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her head forced her back down. A quiet groan escaped her lips. "Easy there." A deep voice came from nearby, startling her. Elizabeth turned her head to see a man rising from a chair beside the bed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges of his collar. His face was weathered but kind, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a dry whisper. "My ranch, outside Eureka Springs." He moved to pour water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "You collapsed at my gate last night. I'm Yorick Grayson." Elizabeth accepted the cup with trembling hands, the cool water bringing immediate relief to her parched throat. Elizabeth Warren, thank you for your kindness, Mr. Grayson. Just Yorick will do. He took the empty cup from her. You've been through quite an ordeal by the looks of things. The memories flooded back: the stagecoach, the attack, the desperate flight through unfamiliar wilderness. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. There was an attack on the stagecoach 3 days ago. Bandits, they killed everyone else. Yorick's expression darkened. The Collier Road stage. We heard about that in town. They said there were no survivors. I hid under the bodies until they left, Elizabeth said quietly, her gaze fixed on her bandaged hands. Then I ran. I've been running ever since. You're safe now, Yorick assured her. Those bandits won't find you here. Elizabeth suddenly realized she was wearing only her chemise and petticoats beneath the coat. Heat flooded her face. My dress. I didn't undress you, Yorick said quickly, a flush appearing on his cheekbones. Your dress was torn beyond saving, and I needed to tend your wounds. I covered you with my coat for warmth. Elizabeth nodded, embarrassment mingling with gratitude. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found your ranch. Let's not dwell on that. Yorick stood and moved toward the door. You need rest and food. I'll fix something and bring it to you. Then, if you're up to it, we can figure out what to do next. As he left the room, Elizabeth sank back against the pillow, pulling the coat closer around her shoulders. Its weight was oddly comforting, like the embrace of a protector. Despite everything, despite the horror of the past days, she felt safe for the first time since leaving Boston. Yorick returned with a tray bearing a bowl of steaming stew and a thick slice of bread. The savory aroma made Elizabeth's stomach clench with hunger. He helped her sit up against the pillows, then placed the tray across her lap. It's nothing fancy, he said apologetically, just venison stew. Elizabeth took a spoonful, the rich flavors exploding on her tongue. It's wonderful, she murmured, taking another bite. She couldn't remember when food had tasted so good. Yorick watched her eat for a moment, then said, If you're feeling up to it later, I can ride into town for the doctor. Elizabeth shook her head. I don't think that's necessary. I'm just exhausted and sore. A few days' rest should set me right. What brought you to Montana Territory, Miss Warren? Yorick asked. You're clearly not from around here. Please call me Elizabeth. She set down her spoon. I came west to join my uncle in Helena. He's my only living relative since my parents passed last winter. The fever took them both within days of each other. I'm sorry for your loss, Yorick said softly. Elizabeth nodded her thanks. Uncle William sent for me. He has a successful hardware business in Helena. I was to help with the accounts and perhaps find a husband out here. She gave a humorless laugh. He always said there were more men than women in the West. That's certainly true, Yorick agreed, though finding a good one might prove challenging. It hardly matters now. I've lost everything in the attack: my luggage, my money, my letter of introduction. Even my shoes. She glanced down at her bandaged feet. Yorick considered her for a moment. We'll figure something out. First, you need to heal. Then we can worry about getting you to Helena. You've already done more than enough, Elizabeth protested. I couldn't impose further. It's no imposition, Yorick said firmly. I can't in good conscience send you off in your condition. Besides, I don't get many visitors out here. Company would be a welcome change. Elizabeth studied him, trying to discern his intentions. In Boston, a single woman staying with an unmarried man would be scandalous, but this was the frontier and different rules seemed to apply. Besides, she had few options. Thank you, she finally said. I'll try not to be a burden. You won't be. Yorick took the empty bowl from her. Rest now. I'll be outside tending to the horses if you need anything. As he left, Elizabeth settled back into the bed, pulling his coat up to her chin. The warmth and the full stomach soon lulled her back to sleep. her dreams for once free of pounding hoofbeats and gunshots. The next few days passed in a blur of sleep and healing. Yorick proved to be an attentive caretaker, bringing meals and fresh water, changing her bandages, and even procuring a nightgown and some basic toiletries from a neighbor's wife who lived 5 miles away. By the 4th day, Elizabeth was able to move around the cabin with the aid of a walking stick Yorick had fashioned for her. Her feet were still tender but healing well. "You're making good progress," Yorick observed as Elizabeth made her way to the table for breakfast. "Another week and you'll be dancing jigs." She smiled at his jest. "I don't know about dancing, but I'd like to be useful. I feel terrible just lying about while you do all the work." "Healing is work," Yorick replied, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "But if you're determined to help, I won't stop you. Maybe you could mend some shirts. I'm afraid my sewing skills leave much to be desired." Elizabeth brightened. "I'd be happy to. It's the least I can do." After breakfast, Yorick brought her a basket of shirts in various states of disrepair. He also supplied needle, thread, and a pair of scissors that he claimed were his mother's. "You mentioned your parents," Elizabeth said as she threaded a needle. "Are they nearby?" Yorick shook his head. "They passed on years ago. Pa took a fever in '68 and Ma followed 6 months later. Some say from a broken heart, though I reckon it was the same fever that just took longer to show." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said softly. "Were you alone after that?" "Had my brother Jacob with me for a while. He helped build this place." Yorick gazed around the cabin with a mixture of pride and sadness. "He moved on to California in '72. Gold fever got him. Gets letters from him now and again. He's doing well, married with 2 little ones." "And you never married?" Elizabeth asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Forgive me, that's none of my business." "No offense taken," Yorick assured her. "I was engaged once back in '69. Her name was Sarah. She couldn't stand the isolation out here, went back east after 3 months. "That must have been difficult," Elizabeth murmured, focusing on her stitches. "It was for the best," Yorick said, his tone suggesting the topic was closed. "I'll be outside if you need anything. Don't overdo it." As the days passed, Elizabeth's strength returned. She began taking on more household tasks: cooking, cleaning, mending. Yorick showed her around the ranch, a modest operation with 20 head of cattle, 4 horses, and a small vegetable garden. "It's not much," he said as they walked the property one evening, the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "But it's mine, free and clear. No debts, no obligations. It's beautiful," Elizabeth said sincerely. "There's a freedom here I never felt in Boston." Yorick glanced at her. "You're not eager to get to Helena, then?" Elizabeth hesitated. The truth was, she'd been thinking less and less about continuing her journey. "I should write to my uncle, let him know what happened, but—" She trailed off, unsure how to express the contentment she'd found in this simple life. "There's no rush," Yorick said. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Elizabeth felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her recovery. A week later, Yorick announced he needed to go into Eureka Springs for supplies. "I thought you might like to come along," he suggested. "Get a change of scenery." Elizabeth hesitated. "I'd love to, but I have nothing appropriate to wear." She'd been making do with the borrowed nightgown and one of Yorick's shirts that she'd altered to fit her. "I took care of that." Yorick looked almost shy as he brought out a package wrapped in brown paper. "Mrs. Landry, the neighbor who lent the nightgown, sent these over yesterday when you were resting." Elizabeth unwrapped the package to find a simple but well-made dress of blue cotton, along with undergarments and a pair of sturdy boots. "This is too much," she protested. "Mrs. Landry's daughter left for Chicago last year," Yorick explained. She said the clothes were just gathering dust, and he hesitated. I ordered the boots from the mercantile last time I was in town, had them delivered yesterday. Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes. Why are you doing all this for me? Yorick looked away, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the wooden table. Everyone deserves kindness, especially after what you've been through. Elizabeth sensed there was more to it than that, but she didn't press. Thank you. I'll cherish these gifts. The following morning, they set out for Eureka Springs. Elizabeth sat beside Yorick on the wagon seat, the borrowed dress fitting her well enough, though it was a bit loose around the waist. The boots were perfectly sized, protecting her still tender feet. It's about an hour's ride, Yorick explained as they set off. Not much of a town compared to Boston, I expect. After spending 2 weeks at your cabin, even a small town will seem bustling, Elizabeth replied with a smile. The journey passed pleasantly, with Yorick pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. Elizabeth found herself laughing more than she had in months, perhaps years. Eureka Springs proved to be exactly as Yorick had described, a modest settlement with a main street boasting a general store, a small hotel, a saloon, a blacksmith, and various other businesses necessary for frontier life. As they pulled up in front of the general store, Elizabeth felt suddenly self-conscious. She was acutely aware that she was an unmarried woman arriving in town with an unmarried man. Perhaps I should wait in the wagon, she suggested. Yorick looked puzzled. Nonsense. You've been cooped up for weeks. Besides, you might see things you need that I wouldn't think to purchase. Before she could protest further, he had come around to her side and was helping her down from the wagon. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately let go, and Elizabeth found herself gazing up into his eyes. There now, he said softly. No need to look so worried. The good people of Eureka Springs don't bite. The spell was broken by a boisterous greeting from across the street. Yorick Grayson, as I live and breathe. Didn't expect to see you in town for another fortnight. A stout man with a magnificent mustache was making his way toward them. He was dressed in the attire of a lawman, complete with a sheriff's badge on his chest. Sheriff Miller, Yorick acknowledged with a nod. Just picking up some supplies. The sheriff's curious gaze moved to Elizabeth. And who might this lovely lady be? Elizabeth Warren, Yorick replied before she could speak. Miss Warren was traveling to Helena when her stagecoach was attacked by bandits. She's been recovering at my ranch these past 2 weeks. Sheriff Miller's expression turned grave. The Collier Road massacre. We thought there were no survivors. I managed to escape, Elizabeth said quietly. Mr. Grayson found me at his gate, half dead. He saved my life. The sheriff studied her for a moment, then nodded. Well, you're in good hands with Yorick, no finer man in the territory. He tipped his hat to her. Madam, if you'd be willing to give a statement about what you saw, it might help us catch those responsible. Elizabeth felt her heart race at the thought of reliving that terrible day, but she nodded. Of course. Anything I can do to help bring them to justice. Much obliged. Sheriff Miller turned to Yorick. You two get your business done, then come by my office before you head back. As the sheriff walked away, Elizabeth noticed that several townspeople had stopped to stare at them. Whispers and curious glances followed them as they entered the general store. Don't mind them, Yorick murmured. News is currency out here, and you're the most interesting thing to happen in Eureka Springs since the Wilkins twins were born with 6 fingers each. Despite his reassurance, Elizabeth felt uncomfortable under the scrutiny. It only worsened when the shopkeeper's wife, a pinch-faced woman named Mrs. Dunn, eyed her with open disapproval. Mr. Grayson, she said coldly, I see you've brought company. Miss Warren is a survivor of the stagecoach attack, Yorick replied evenly. She's been recuperating at my ranch until she's well enough to continue to Helena. Mrs. Dunn's expression didn't soften. How charitable of you. Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. The implication was clear: her reputation was compromised by staying with an unmarried man. Yorick seemed to sense her distress. He placed a protective hand at the small of her back. Mrs. Dunn, I'd appreciate if you'd show Miss Warren your fabric selection. She's in need of some new clothing. The shopkeeper's wife pursed her lips but led Elizabeth to the far side of the store. As they examined bolts of fabric, Mrs. Dunn couldn't resist commenting, "You know, Miss Warren, the hotel has rooms available. It would be more appropriate." Elizabeth straightened her spine. "Mr. Grayson has been nothing but a gentleman. He saved my life when I had nowhere else to turn." "I'm sure," Mrs. Dunn sniffed, "but people talk, especially in small towns." "Let them talk," Elizabeth replied, selecting a bolt of practical brown cotton. "I know the truth, and so does Mr. Grayson. That's all that matters." When they finished their shopping and left the store, Elizabeth was relieved to be out of Mrs. Dunn's judgmental presence, but she couldn't help noticing the stares that followed them down the street. "I'm sorry," she said quietly as they walked toward the sheriff's office. "I didn't consider how my presence might affect your standing in the community." Yorick looked genuinely puzzled. "My standing? I don't give 2 cents what busybodies like Mrs. Dunn think. You needed help and I provided it. There's no shame in that." "In Boston, a woman staying alone with a man would be considered—" "This isn't Boston," Yorick interrupted gently. "Out here, we judge people by their actions, not by rigid social rules. At least, those of us with any sense do." His words comforted her, but Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that she was causing him trouble. As they neared the sheriff's office, she made a decision. "After I give my statement, I should inquire about the next stage to Helena," she said, trying to sound practical rather than reluctant. Yorick stopped walking and turned to face her. "Is that what you want, to leave?" Elizabeth couldn't meet his eyes. "I don't want to impose any longer. You've done more than enough already." "You're not imposing," Yorick said firmly. He hesitated, then added more softly, "I've enjoyed having you at the ranch." Before she could respond, the door to the sheriff's office opened, and Sheriff Miller beckoned them inside. The moment passed, but Elizabeth carried Yorick's words with her as she recounted the horror of the stagecoach attack. She described how the bandits had ambushed them in a narrow pass, shooting the driver and guard before the stage had even stopped. How they'd dragged the passengers out one by one, taking valuables and killing without mercy. How she'd played dead among the bodies until they left, then fled into the wilderness. There were 5 of them, she concluded. The leader had a scar running from his eye to his chin. They called him Scarface. Sheriff Miller nodded grimly. "Sounds like Jake Thorpe's gang. They've been terrorizing these parts for months. Your testimony will help us build a stronger case when we catch them." When they finished at the sheriff's office, Yorick suggested they get something to eat before heading back to the ranch. They found a small cafe that served simple but hearty food. As they ate, Elizabeth brought up the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "I should write to my uncle today, let him know what happened." Yorick nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course. You can post the letter before we leave town." "He'll likely want me to come to Helena as soon as possible," she continued, watching Yorick's face for a reaction. "Likely so," Yorick agreed, his tone neutral. "Family is important." Elizabeth felt a pang of disappointment at his apparent indifference. Had she misread his earlier words? Perhaps he was simply being polite, and her presence at the ranch was more burden than pleasure. Their ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey into town. Elizabeth composed her letter to Uncle William in her mind, trying to decide how much to tell him about her ordeal and her time with Yorick. As the ranch came into view, Elizabeth felt a surprising sense of homecoming. In just 2 weeks, this modest cabin had become more of a home to her than her parents' grand house in Boston had ever been. Yorick helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I'll unload the supplies." "Why don't you go write that letter to your uncle?" Elizabeth nodded and went inside. She found paper and pen in a drawer where Yorick kept his sparse correspondence and sat at the table to write. She started several versions, discarding each one. How could she explain what had happened? How could she convey that, while she still intended to come to Helena eventually, she wasn't ready to leave the ranch to leave Yorick just yet? In the end, she wrote a simple account of the attack, explained that she had been rescued by a kind rancher, and promised to come to Helena when she was fully recovered. She deliberately left it vague as to when that might be. When Yorick came in, she was sealing the envelope. "I've written to Uncle William," she said, holding up the letter. "Would you be able to post it next time you go to town, of course?" Yorick took the letter and placed it on the mantel. He hesitated, then said, "I bought something for you in town. It's not much, but—" He reached into his pocket and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. Elizabeth unwrapped it to find a simple silver hairpin with a small pearl set in the end. "It's beautiful," she breathed, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. "I noticed you've been using a stick to keep your hair up," Yorick explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "Thought you might like something better." Elizabeth impulsively rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Thank you. No one has given me such a thoughtful gift in a very long time." Yorick's ears reddened, but he looked pleased. "Well, I should see to the horses," he said gruffly, heading back outside. Elizabeth touched her fingertips to the spot where she had kissed him, wondering at her own boldness. She had never been forward with men in Boston, always maintaining the proper distance that society demanded. But here, miles from civilization with this quiet, honorable man, the rules seemed different. She felt different, more alive, more herself. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Elizabeth worked up the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since their trip to town. "Yorick, did you really mean what you said about enjoying having me here?" He looked up from the bridle he was mending, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I wouldn't have said it if I didn't mean it. Even though it causes gossip in town," Yorick set aside his work. "Elizabeth, I've lived alone for 7 years. I'm used to the quiet, to doing things my own way. But having you here—" He paused, searching for words. "It's like the cabin was missing something all this time, and I never knew what until you arrived." Elizabeth's heart quickened at his words. "I feel the same way. These past weeks, despite everything that led me here, have been special." Yorick moved to sit beside her on the bench. "Your uncle will be expecting you in Helena." "Yes," she agreed softly. "But perhaps you could stay a while longer," Yorick suggested, "until you're fully recovered." Elizabeth smiled, reading the unspoken question in his eyes. "I think that would be wise. My feet still trouble me at times. And the nights are getting colder," Yorick added. "Travel will be difficult soon." "Perhaps I could stay until spring," Elizabeth suggested, feeling bold. Yorick's smile was like the sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Perhaps you could." The following weeks settled into a comfortable rhythm. Elizabeth took over most of the household duties, freeing Yorick to focus on the ranch. They worked well together, developing an easy partnership that felt natural to both of them. As October painted the surrounding forests in brilliant reds and golds, Elizabeth and Yorick spent more time together in the evenings. He taught her to play checkers and was delighted to find she had a quick mind for strategy. She taught him songs she had learned as a child, and though he claimed to have a terrible voice, he joined in the choruses. They shared stories of their lives, Elizabeth's sheltered upbringing in Boston society, Yorick's more rugged childhood in Ohio before his family moved west. They discovered shared values despite their different backgrounds: a love of books, a belief in hard work, a distaste for pretense. One crisp evening in late October, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Elizabeth had wrapped herself in Yorick's coat, the same one he had covered her with on that first night. It had become a comfort to her, like the man himself. "Winter will be here soon," Yorick observed, looking at the darkening sky. "First snow usually comes by early November." "I've never experienced a Montana winter," Elizabeth said. "Is it very harsh?" "It can be," Yorick admitted. "We get snowed in sometimes for days. The winds are the worst part, they cut right through you." Elizabeth shivered, pulling the coat tighter. "I'm not sure my Boston constitution is ready for that." Yorick glanced at her. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Elizabeth. You survived an attack that killed everyone else. You walked barefoot through the wilderness for 3 days. You're made of stern stuff." His words warmed her more than the coat. "Thank you for believing in me." "It's not belief, it's fact." Yorick hesitated, then added, "I've been meaning to ask you something." "Yes, your letter to your uncle. Have you been wondering why there's been no reply?" Elizabeth had indeed wondered about that. It had been over a month since they'd posted the letter. "I assumed the mail is slow out here." "It is, but not that slow." Yorick looked troubled. "I asked around in town last week. There's been no mail from Helena in 3 weeks. The stage routes have been disrupted by bandit attacks." Elizabeth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "The same bandits who attacked my coach, possibly. The sheriff isn't sure, but it means travel to Helena would be dangerous right now." "I see." Elizabeth wasn't sure whether to feel relieved that she had a legitimate reason to delay her departure or concerned about the danger. "Do you think my uncle received my letter?" "Hard to say. Mail going north might have gotten through before the disruption." Yorick paused. "Elizabeth, I need to be honest with you about something." The seriousness in his tone alarmed her. "What is it?" "I'm glad the mail is disrupted," he admitted. "I'm glad there's a reason for you to stay longer. I know it's selfish, but I'm not ready for you to leave." Elizabeth's heart swelled at his confession. "It's not selfish, or if it is, then I'm selfish too, because I'm not ready to leave." Yorick turned to face her fully, his eyes intense in the fading light. "What are you saying, Elizabeth?" "I'm saying that I've found something here that I never expected to find." She gathered her courage. "I've found you." Yorick reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused against her softer skin. "From the moment I found you at my gate, something changed for me. It was like finding a piece of myself I never knew was missing." Elizabeth felt tears well in her eyes. "I felt lost before I came here, even before the attack. My parents were gone. I was being sent to an uncle I barely knew. But with you, I've found a place where I belong." Yorick's other hand came up to gently cup her cheek. "Elizabeth Warren, I never thought I'd say these words to anyone again, but I find myself falling in love with you." "And I with you," Elizabeth whispered. The kiss that followed was gentle and tentative at first, then deepening as they both gave in to feelings that had been building for weeks. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I don't want to rush you," Yorick said softly. "And I know there are complications, your uncle, the distance to Helena, what people in town might say." Elizabeth placed a finger against his lips. "There will always be complications, but what matters is what we feel. And I know what I feel, Yorick Grayson." The first snow came 2 days later, earlier than expected. Elizabeth woke to a world transformed, everything covered in a blanket of pristine white. Yorick was already up, stoking the fire to ward off the penetrating chill. "It's beautiful," she breathed, gazing out the window. "Beautiful, yes, but it means more work," Yorick said pragmatically. "The cattle need extra feed when the grass is covered, and I need to break ice on the water troughs." Elizabeth set about making a hearty breakfast while Yorick pulled on his heavy coat and gloves. Before he went out, he kissed her soundly, a gesture that still thrilled her even though it had become regular in the past 2 days. "Be careful out there," she said, straightening his collar. "Always am." He grinned and headed out into the snow. Elizabeth busied herself with household tasks, but her mind kept wandering to thoughts of the future. She and Yorick hadn't discussed marriage explicitly, but it seemed the natural progression of their feelings. Still, there was the matter of her uncle in Helena. She owed him the courtesy of explaining her change in plans in person, especially after he had gone to the trouble of sending for her. When Yorick returned for lunch, stamping snow from his boots at the door, Elizabeth had made a decision. "I think we should try to reach Helena when the weather permits," she announced as they sat down to eat. "I need to speak with my uncle face to face." Yorick looked surprised but nodded slowly. "That's only right. But it might be spring before the roads are safe for travel, both from weather and bandits." "I'm prepared to wait," Elizabeth assured him. "I'm not going anywhere permanently, Yorick. I just need to settle matters properly." Relief washed over his features. "I understand. And I respect that you want to do things properly." He reached across the table to take her hand. "Whatever happens, Elizabeth, know that my feelings won't change." "Nor will mine," she promised. The winter passed in a cocoon of intimacy and shared work. The small cabin that had once seemed perfectly sized for one man now felt cozy with two. They developed routines and rituals that bound them together: morning coffee by the fire, reading aloud to each other in the evenings, Yorick teaching Elizabeth how to shoot a rifle, just in case. They made occasional trips into Eureka Springs when the weather allowed, facing the gossip and stares with united composure. Over time, as it became clear that Yorick and Elizabeth's relationship was serious and honorable in intent, even Mrs. Dunn's pinched expression softened somewhat. Sheriff Miller brought news in February that Jake Thorpe's gang had been captured near the Wyoming border. Elizabeth's testimony would still be needed when they stood trial in the spring, but the immediate threat had passed. "That's one worry off our minds," Yorick remarked as they rode home from town after hearing the news. "Yes," Elizabeth agreed, "and hopefully the stage routes will be safer now." Yorick glanced at her. "Are you eager to get to Helena?" "Not eager to leave you," she clarified, "but eager to resolve matters with my uncle so we can move forward with our life together." She hesitated, then added, "That is, if you're still thinking along those lines." Yorick pulled the wagon to a stop on a ridge overlooking the snow-covered valley. "Elizabeth Warren, I have been thinking of little else. I was just waiting for the right moment to ask properly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right time." Elizabeth's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Pa gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found the right woman." "Yorick," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. He took her gloved hand in his. "I know I'm not a wealthy man, and this ranch isn't much compared to what you might have had in Boston, but I swear I'll work every day to make you happy. Will you marry me, Elizabeth?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes." The kiss they shared seemed to warm the entire winter landscape around them. Spring came to Montana with a rush of melting snow and greening valleys. The day after the last snow melted from the pass, Yorick and Elizabeth set out for Helena. It was a 3-day journey by wagon, staying at way stations along the route. Elizabeth felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as they approached the bustling mining town. Helena, in 1876, was a city of contrasts. Elegant brick buildings stood alongside hastily constructed wooden structures, while miners and merchants mingled on streets that were either dust or mud, depending on the weather. They found her uncle's hardware store on Last Chance Gulch, the main thoroughfare. William Warren was a tall, thin man with the same auburn hair as Elizabeth, though his was streaked with gray. His surprise at seeing his niece was evident. "Elizabeth, my dear girl, I had given you up for lost," he exclaimed, embracing her awkwardly. "I received your letter in November, but when you didn't arrive and then the stage routes were disrupted." He trailed off, noticing Yorick for the first time. "And who might this be, Uncle William? This is Yorick Grayson. He saved my life after the stagecoach attack." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "He's also the man I'm going to marry." William's eyebrows shot up in astonishment. "Marry? But you've only just arrived in the territory." "Actually, I've been in Montana for nearly 7 months," Elizabeth explained, "living at Mr. Grayson's ranch while I recovered from my ordeal." Her uncle's expression darkened. "You've been living with this man, unchaperoned." "It wasn't like that," Elizabeth said quickly. "Mr. Grayson has been the perfect gentleman, and we've come to care deeply for one another." William looked skeptical. "Elizabeth, you've been through a traumatic experience. It's natural to develop feelings for someone who rescued you, but marriage is a serious commitment." "I'm well aware of that, Uncle," Elizabeth replied, her voice firming. "I'm not some flighty girl making a rash decision. I love Yorick and he loves me." Yorick, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "Mr. Warren, I understand your concerns. I assure you my intentions toward your niece are honorable. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have about my character or circumstances." William studied the rancher with a critical eye. "And what are your circumstances, Mr. Grayson? How do you propose to support my niece?" "I own a cattle ranch free and clear, 20 miles outside Eureka Springs. It's modest but profitable enough to live comfortably," Yorick replied evenly. "I see. And what of Elizabeth's future? She was to help with my accounts here. She has an education that would be wasted on a ranch." Elizabeth interjected. "Uncle William, I appreciate your concern, but my future is my decision, and I've decided to build it with Yorick." Her uncle sighed, recognizing the determination in her tone. "You sound just like your mother. Once she made up her mind, there was no changing it." His expression softened slightly. "At least stay in town a few days. Let me get to know the man who has so thoroughly won your heart." Elizabeth glanced at Yorick, who nodded. "We'd be honored," she agreed. The next few days were a whirlwind of introductions and explanations. William Warren proved to be less intractable than he first appeared, especially once he observed the obvious affection between Elizabeth and Yorick. He arranged a dinner with several prominent citizens, subtly vetting Yorick's character through their conversations. "Your young man acquitted himself well last night," William commented to Elizabeth as they shared breakfast at his comfortable home. "Judge Patterson was particularly impressed with his knowledge of water rights. He's an intelligent man, Uncle. He may not have had formal schooling past the age of 14, but he's read more books than anyone I know." Elizabeth hesitated, then added, "I hope you can see why I love him." William patted her hand. "I can see it, my dear, and more importantly, I can see that he loves you deeply. Your parents would have wanted you to be happy, and it's clear to me that you are." "Then you give us your blessing." "I do," William confirmed. "Though I still think your talents are being wasted on a cattle ranch." Elizabeth smiled. "Perhaps not. Yorick and I have been discussing expanding the operation, perhaps adding sheep. There will be accounts to keep, supplies to order. My education won't go to waste." On their last evening in Helena, William surprised them with a deed to 40 acres adjoining Yorick's property. "It was meant to be Elizabeth's dowry of sorts," he explained. "Now it can help you expand that ranch of yours." Yorick was momentarily speechless. "Mr. Warren, this is too generous." "Nonsense. It's an investment in my niece's happiness," William insisted. "Just promise me you'll take good care of her." "With every breath in my body," Yorick vowed. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Eureka Springs. The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of neighbors, Sheriff Miller and Uncle William, who had made the journey from Helena for the occasion. Elizabeth wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Landry had helped her make, with the pearl hairpin that Yorick had given her securing her veil. Yorick looked uncommonly handsome in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Elizabeth thought back to that desperate night when she had collapsed at Yorick's gate, bruised and barefoot. How strange and wonderful that her lowest moment had led her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. After the ceremony, there was a modest celebration at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music. As the evening wore on, Elizabeth found herself standing on the porch, gazing at the stars that seemed to burn with particular brightness. Yorick joined her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders just as he had done that first night. "Happy Mrs. Grayson," the name sent a thrill through her. "Completely, Mr. Grayson." He pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her waist. "When I found you at my gate that night, I thought I was saving you. I never realized you were saving me too." "From what?" she asked softly. "From loneliness, from a half-lived life." He kissed her forehead. "You brought light back into my world, Elizabeth." "And you gave me a home when I had none," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "We saved each other." As their lips met under the vast Montana sky, Elizabeth knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Not in Boston's society, nor in Helena's growing prosperity, but here on this ranch with this man who had wrapped her in his coat when she was at her most vulnerable. Life on the ranch settled into a new pattern after their marriage. With the additional land from Uncle William and Yorick's careful management, they were able to expand their cattle herd and add a flock of sheep, just as they had discussed. Elizabeth proved to have a good head for business, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to increase their profits. By their first anniversary, the ranch was thriving, and Elizabeth had news of her own to share. On a crisp September evening, as they sat by the fire, she took Yorick's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she announced, watching his face for his reaction. Yorick's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to absolute joy. "A baby, you're sure?" "As sure as can be," she confirmed. "Dr. Foster says it will be spring when the little one arrives." Yorick gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "A family," he whispered against her hair. "Our family." The winter of 1877-1878 was particularly harsh, with blizzards that howled around the cabin for days. But inside, warmed by the fire and their love, Elizabeth and Yorick prepared for their child's arrival. Yorick built a cradle from pine wood, carefully sanding it smooth, while Elizabeth sewed tiny garments from soft flannel. Uncle William, who had become a frequent visitor despite the distance from Helena, sent a rocking chair and a box of books for the child's education. As Elizabeth's body changed, growing round with new life, Yorick treated her with a reverence that sometimes made her laugh. "I'm not made of china, you know," she teased one evening when he insisted on carrying her from the porch to their bed. "You're carrying precious cargo," he replied seriously. "I'm taking no chances." Their son, Jacob William Grayson, was born on a perfect spring morning in April 1878. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from his first lusty cry it was clear he had inherited both their strong wills. "He's perfect," Yorick marveled, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that seemed suddenly enormous. "He is," Elizabeth agreed, exhausted but exhilarated. "And he's ours." As Jacob grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They added a wing to the cabin, hired a hand to help with the increasing workload, and began to build a reputation for quality stock. Elizabeth never regretted her decision to stay in Montana. The society life she'd known in Boston seemed like a distant dream compared to the rich reality of her life with Yorick and Jacob. Here, she was valued for her intelligence and strength rather than her social graces. Here, she was truly herself. On the third anniversary of the day she had collapsed at Yorick's gate, Elizabeth sat on the porch swing he had built the previous summer, watching him play with their son in the yard. Jacob, now a sturdy 2-year-old with boundless energy, was shrieking with laughter as his father pretended to be a wild horse. "Mama, look," Jacob called, spotting her. "Daddy horse." "I see, sweetheart," she called back, smiling at the scene. Yorick trotted over to the porch, their son secure on his shoulders. "What are you thinking about, looking so thoughtful?" he asked, settling Jacob down to play with his wooden blocks. "I was thinking about the day we met," Elizabeth admitted. "About how close I came to never finding you." Yorick sat beside her on the swing, taking her hand in his. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Elizabeth. Some things are just destined. Like a half-dead woman collapsing at your gate," she teased gently. "Exactly like that." He squeezed her hand. "I thank God every day that you found the strength to make it to my ranch. And I thank God you were the kind of man who would take in a stranger in need." She leaned her head against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The terror of the stagecoach attack, the desperate flight through the wilderness, the pain and exhaustion that had nearly claimed her life, all of it had led to this moment, this life, this love. She had arrived bruised and barefoot at Yorick's gate, with nothing but the tattered clothes on her back. She had woken wrapped in his coat, a simple act of kindness that had been the first thread in the tapestry of their life together. Now, 3 years later, sitting on their porch with their son playing at their feet and another child growing beneath her heart, a daughter, she suspected Elizabeth knew that she had found something rare and precious. Not just love, but a true partnership, a home, a future built on mutual respect and shared dreams. "Penny for your thoughts," Yorick murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Elizabeth smiled, placing her free hand over her stomach where their second child was just beginning to make itself known. "I was thinking that some journeys, no matter how difficult, lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Yorick followed her gaze to where their son was carefully stacking blocks, his little face a study in concentration. "And this is where we're meant to be. Together." "Together," Elizabeth echoed, the word a promise, a celebration, a testament to the love that had grown from the ashes of tragedy. A love as vast as the Montana sky above them, as enduring as the mountains on the horizon, as real and true as the family they had created. In the gathering twilight, with the first stars appearing overhead, Elizabeth Grayson, once Elizabeth Warren of Boston, knew with absolute certainty that she was home.